Mystery of the Tolling Bell by Carolyn Keene. Chapter 1 The Perfume Cart. Nancy, aren't we almost at Candleton? I'm tired of riding. An athletic-looking girl with short dark hair and the boyish name of George Fane stretched warily in the convertible as it sped toward the ocean. Nancy Drew, 18 and attractive, was driving. She shrugged her shoulders and breathed deeply of the tangy salt air. A gust of wind blew her reddish-golden hair across her eyes. Tossing it aside, she smiled at the two girls seated with her, Bess Marvin and George, who were cousins. "A few more miles," Nancy replied, "but it's worth waiting for." "You mean because of the mystery at Candleton?" Bess asked teasingly. She was blonde and pretty. "Right now, I'm more interested in food." "You shouldn't be," George said bluntly, glancing at her cousin's slightly plump figure. Nancy laughed. "We have to eat, calories or not. Perhaps we'll come to a fishing village where we can get some lobster." The three girls, who lived in River Heights, were en route to Candleton on Whitecap Bay. They had been invited to spend a brief vacation there as guests of Mrs. John Chantry. She was a close friend and client of Nancy's father, a well-known lawyer. He was to meet the girls at her home in a small town. "I think your father was smart to make the trip by plane instead of riding with us," Bess observed as the car swung around another sharp curve. "At least he won't die of starvation." "This is really a business trip for Dad," Nancy said. "Poor Mrs. Chantry was swindled out of a lot of money. Dad's trying to get it back." "How did it happen?" George asked. "Dad didn't tell me many of the details," Nancy replied, "but he did hint at mystery. Mrs. Chantry is a lovely person. I hope we can help her." "She runs a tea room?" George inquired. "Yes. Mrs. Chantry opened a gift shop and tea room to make a livelihood for herself after she lost most of her money." "I was hoping the mystery at Candleton would be about something more romantic than money," Bess remarked in disappointment. Nancy's eyes twinkled. "There's another mystery," she said. "Mrs. Chantry mentioned in her letter that ghostly and unexplained things happen along the coast of Whitecap Bay." George was interested at once. "Are you going to work on that too?" "All three of us are," was the reply. Nancy's young life had been crammed with adventure. Daughter of an eminent criminal lawyer, she was unusually sensible, clever, and talented. Mrs. Drew had died when Nancy was 3 years old, and Hannah Gruen had become the Drews' housekeeper. The kindly woman was like a mother to Nancy, and was constantly warning her to be cautious while solving mysteries. "If the three of us can't solve the two mysteries," Nancy began. "Look!" Bess interrupted, pointing to a sign. "Fisher's Cove! We're coming to a town!" The road curved and twisted, then abruptly a cluster of quaint, unpainted houses came into view. Fishnets were drying on lines in the backyards. Children stopped their play and stared at the car. "Apparently, few tourists come into town this way," Nancy commented, steering carefully to avoid a street peddler who carried a basket of fish on his head. "We seem to be curiosities." The girls looked hopefully for a place to eat. As Nancy turned left onto Main Street, they saw 2 hotels and several restaurants. Bess noted a sign with the name Wayside Inn and an arrow pointing up a narrow lane. "Let's go there," she suggested. Presently, they came to a freshly painted white house overlooking the surf. It proved to be cool, clean, and inviting. Although it was late for luncheon, the woman in charge assured the girls she could serve them. The trio found the meal very appetizing. In addition to lobster and puffed shrimp, there were tomatoes, coleslaw, potatoes, hot biscuits, lemonade, and apple pie. "I know I've gained a dozen pounds," Bess moaned as they paid for their bill and left the inn. "I feel like a puffed shrimp myself," groaned George. "Let's walk around Fisher's Cove a while for exercise before we drive on." Although eager to reach Candleton, Nancy agreed to the suggestion. They took a path which led from the sandy shore to the shopping area of the village. Here the girls found an interesting combination of the old and the new. An ancient surrey rattled past, drawn by a tired-looking white horse. The reins were held by an elderly man with a long flowing beard. Then a high-powered sports car sped by, a pretty girl at the wheel. Natives were a striking contrast to members of the summer colony who wore scanty beach clothes. Look, cried Nancy suddenly as the girls reached a corner. Isn't that attractive? From a side street came the musical tinkle of a bell. Then a dark-haired, heavy-set woman pushing a flower-decked cart came into view. Seeing the girls, she moved briskly toward them. Wonder what she's selling, Bess said in an undertone. Dangling from a wire stretched between two poles on either side of the cart were strings of tiny red metal hearts and a little bell. The woman, who looked to be of foreign birth, wore a red skirt and white blouse with a large red heart embroidered on one sleeve. As she came alongside the girls, she addressed them in a torrent of words. You buy from Madame? I sell all these articles for beautiment. Come see. She held up a bottle of perfume, some face powder, and lipstick. Then she rolled her eyes and smiled. These products make Mademoiselle adored by the boyfriend. Bess, intrigued by the display of cosmetics, fingered a large heart-shaped compact. Very chic, very cheap, the woman said in a sing-song voice. $7, please. But I don't wish to buy, Beth stammered, putting the compact back on the cart. You like better the perfume? Before Bess could retreat, the woman had uncorked a tiny, heart-shaped flask, which she waved beneath Bess's nose. One drop of this, and piff, the boyfriend is yours. By this time, a large number of persons had gathered about the cart. Many in the crowd were young girls. Just like in New York, Madame announced proudly, sold only in the best salons. I don't recall seeing the brand name before, Nancy remarked, observing that all the cosmetic containers bore the French words mon cœur. It means my heart, translated Madame. How much? Inquired a rather unattractive, large-boned girl with blonde hair. The woman named a high figure. That's a lot of money, the blonde girl commented. I give you demonstration to go with it. Madame took the bill offered her, then quickly applied the cosmetics to the girl's face. The woman's sales talk convinced other bystanders. They bought the Moncourt products freely, while the blonde girl walked to a shop window and looked in the side mirror. To the surprise of Nancy and George, she liberally put on more of the cosmetics. Then, apparently satisfied but vulgarly conspicuous, she went down the street. Bess was intrigued by Madame and could not resist the temptation to buy. I'll take a small bottle of perfume, she decided. Bess, remonstrated George, you don't know a thing about Moncourt products. My things are of the finest, Madame retorted. Bess, do come away, Nancy urged. Quick as a flash, Madame thrust the bottle into Bess's hand and snatched the money the girl had taken from her purse. Is this perfume the same as the sample bottle? Bess asked. They all the same, snapped the woman. She quickly gave Bess the change, then hurriedly walked down the street with her cart. In her haste to get away, Madame cut directly across the road. The little bell jangled, and the heart-shaped decoration swung back and forth. At the same time, the surrey with the old white horse, which the girls had seen earlier, jogged down the street. Its driver dozed at the reins. Suddenly, a car backfired, frightening his mare. She gave a startled snort. Before the elderly driver realized what was happening, the animal bolted straight toward the woman and her cart. With a scream of terror, Madame abandoned the cart and raced for safety. The horse plunged along wildly, pulling the surrey over the curb, then back into the roadway again. All the pedestrians had run for cover. The flower-decked cart stood in the middle of the street, directly in the path of the runaway horse. Nancy darted out and wheeled the cart to safety. An instant later, the horse flashed by. Not until the mare had gone another block did the driver regain control. Nancy, you might have been killed! Bess cried out. She was trembling. It was a courageous thing to do, but silly, George said. Madame's cosmetics aren't worth the risk you took. I agree with you, Nancy said, parking the cart under an awning. I acted impulsively. Let's go, George urged. Without waiting for Madame to return, the three friends started to cross the street. As Nancy stepped from the curb, an excited woman rushed up and seized her arm. You're the one, she screamed. I'm going to have you arrested. Startled, Nancy retreated a step, but the stranger held tightly onto her arm. "You're a thief, and you've got no business in this town," she shouted. "You've ruined my daughter and taken her money. Police! Police!"